Sheryl Hiatt with the Nebraska Department of Economic Development. I'm the Director of Housing and Field Operations for the department. We have 5 housing programs that the Department of Economic Development administers. 3 of those are federal programs and 2 are state funded. And among those programs, on an annual basis, we put out about $20 million in housing projects across the state. I'm going to run through a couple of these pretty quickly. The federal programs. The Community Development Block Grant Program, we have a housing category, anywhere from $2 to $3 million annually. We put out into owner-occupied rehab projects. So what Laura was mentioning about, maintaining and improving the existing housing stock, these funds accomplish that goal, and oftentimes we'll make those units available. In the case of elderly moving on to a different housing option, make those available to workforce at 80% of area median income. That is an annual competitive cycle, and we're reviewing those applications for 2019 right now, and those awards will be announced in November. There we go. There's an example of one of the owner-occupied rehab projects in York. Another federal program is the HOME program. It's a more complicated program, but certainly serving entry-level workers with the rentals that we fund in a joint application with NYFA and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And then also some home buyer projects with our community development housing organizations in that 80% of area median income. That's also a joint NYFA application project on the rentals, and typically these are complicated projects, but they do take place across the state, and we're working with, in most cases, the nonprofits are working with experienced developers to access those funds. Here's a picture of a rental rehabilitation project in Hastings that used home funds, the Brewery Lofts, and we've got a couple of single-family new construction. One of those, the top one is in North Platte and the bottom one is in David City. The National Housing Trust Fund is a relatively new program for the department. I think we're maybe in the 3rd year of putting those projects out. We get about $3 million annually, and the multifamily rental projects are a joint application also with NYFA and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. This is serving a very low-income clientele, often elderly and those with special needs. But in the case of housing elderly, also opening up units either in the community or maybe in another community if folks are moving to be closer to family. A nice example of a rental rehabilitation project is Norfolk, the Skyline Manor. Those units are very nice. Persons with special needs live in that facility, and that's a nice success story. 2 of our state programs really I think are the best focus for workforce housing, and we've been doing workforce housing for a long time with the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It wasn't called workforce housing, but it does. Many in this room, and the Nebraska Bankers Association was involved in 1996 when this. We did a lot of the same things that we did with rural workforce housing. Went out across the state talking about what are the housing needs, why aren't we meeting the housing needs, and that bill was passed in '96, and then you can see it's been revised a lot over the years, most recently in this past legislative session. We do get about $10 million to $11 million annually through this program, and the funding source is the doc stamp. 95 cents out of the $2.25 that's levied on every $1,000 of valuation of real estate transfers in the state goes to fund this program. So local governments, communities can apply, and as well as nonprofits. So we see a mix of those. Public housing authorities and community action agencies are also eligible to apply for these funds. And for-profit entities, builders, developers, contractors are eligible to receive these funds if they're working in conjunction with an eligible applicant. So they can't apply directly, but they can work with either the city or a nonprofit in the community to apply for those funds on an annual basis. We have a variety of eligible projects for homeowners, home buyers, rentals, and we also provide some nonprofit technical assistance or operating funds to those nonprofits. Sometimes it's a new nonprofit getting into housing, or maybe an existing nonprofit that's expanding their service area, those types of things. Also training, education, those kinds of things. But we do have a variety of uses, and it's a very competitive cycle. We do one cycle a year, and then and we do have the ability to have additional cycles. And in this past year, we got to do 2 of those, which means we first doubled, thank you, Dave Rippey, and then tripled our efforts there, because we didn't expend all of the funds in 2018 on projects, and so we opened up a demonstration round and took applications that way, looking for more creative and new uses for those funds. And then after the March disasters, we opened a disaster recovery application cycle. So it's been an exciting year. All of those funds have been awarded for the year. In the annual cycle, we got 53 applications requesting $19 million. And we have a pre-application process that we had 85 pre-apps in requesting $30 million. So we were really nervous about the increase in demand, but a number of those projects, I think some related to the disaster and all the other things that were going on in the state, and some of those projects slowed down. Contractors are now busy not only with disaster recovery, but the projects that they were working on from the previous year. So we funded 21 of those applications for $7 million, and then during the disaster cycle, we awarded 6 applications for $3 million. So as I said, those are
How much was the last number?
$3 million. So the $10 million it's a little over $10 million that's out awarded in projects for this year. We have a suggested maximum of $500,000. In the past, we exceeded that quite frequently, but with the demand that we're seeing right now, we've just kind of stuck with that limit, trying to fund as many projects across the state as we can. We are included in the statute is an allocation of 30% of those funds goes to each congressional district, and there's an affordability period of 5 to 10 years. There are also several first priorities over the years they've gotten added in. One is serving the lowest income of persons for the longest period of time. Enterprise zones and extremely blighted areas have now been added to that list of priorities. So we do have some limitations on those funds. They do go up to, can serve clients, as you heard, lowest income for the longest period of time, but also the maximum level is 120% of area median income. So I thought you might want to see, oftentimes that's a question of what that is. Most of the state is at that 84,000. I listed a number of those counties, but there are several counties that are higher for a 4-person household. The top picture is a trust fund funded single-family home buyer unit in Ord, and Mark mentioned Stewart. At the bottom is a duplex. It's a rental, new construction, that was constructed in Stewart using trust funds. Stewart has traditionally done home buyer spec homes, and this was their first venture into a rental. They saw a need in their community, and they've had no trouble keeping that rented. And at one time, I know there was a school teacher, a new teacher to the district, living in one of those units, and also an interesting story with an employee of the fertilizer plant, moved in one side and was there for a while, and met a local girl and got married and bought one of their home buyer units across the street and down the block. So definitely.
Who one's the townhouse, the duplex? Is that?
Actually, the nursing home in Stewart is a nonprofit, community owned, and so that's their nonprofit that they work with. They do things through the city too, but that's who owns the rental and manages the rental. So nice fit in their community. The nursing home also has assisted living and some rental units as well for seniors. Whoops. The other program that we talked about earlier is the rural workforce. Thanks for the support from the Nebraska Bankers Association. They certainly championed those efforts and worked closely with Senator Matt Williams, who introduced LB 518 in the 2017 legislative session. And that act created the Rural Workforce Housing Fund, which moved $7 million of money from the trust fund, from the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was in excess, and it's a one-time transfer from that program to the rural workforce housing. It required that regional nonprofit development organizations set up rural workforce investment funds, so basically revolving loan funds or investment funds at the local level, and start to fund with a combination of public and private dollars workforce housing efforts. The governor signed that bill into law in April of 2017, and a wheel started rolling. Many of us were involved in talking through how that program was going to work. We wanted to get it out as quickly as possible, and so we started developing the program guidelines that would direct the program. There were some limitations within the legislation. Of course, it's one-time funding, so that's the biggest limitation. It was a rural program, so there were 3 counties in the state that were deemed ineligible, and we got a little feedback on that. A current housing study with workforce housing needs addressed needed to be in place, and so that was one point that was limiting at the local level. If they didn't have a current housing study, they were really moving quickly to get that. There are no income limits with this program, but there are maximum construction cost limits. So $275,000 for an owner-occupied single-family home, and in the case of rental units, $200,000 per unit. They also only allowed for substantial rehabilitation. So we have other programs that do rehabilitation, but this was substantial. So the cost to rehab had to exceed 50% of the assessed value of the property. They were also restricted from using any of those other programs that would further restrict these projects. So they couldn't have the CDBG, the trust fund, or the low-income housing tax credits. They had 24 months from the time of the award to have a unit reasonably ready for occupancy, which all of them are moving really quickly, so I don't anticipate that we're going to have any problems there. And then another 24 months to get everything committed. And like I said, I'm not anticipating that we're going to have any issues there. Those organizations are subject to an annual audit, and we have at the department annual reporting requirements. So the wheel that started turning, we put the application guidelines together, and those went out for public comment during November and December of 2017, and we had a final application available on January 3rd. The statute dictated a 90-day application period, so on March 30th, we got 21 applications in, asking for $15.1 million, and we had $7 million to allocate. There was a lot of talk during that process. Okay, what do we do if we don't get enough applications in? When are we going to start the second round? And we had talked about, actually opening that up right away so that if we didn't get the funds out. When we saw the number of applications and the amount of match that had been raised across the state, we were pretty confident that we were going to be able to award the funds. We announced those awards on March the 1st, or on May the 1st, and we had funds going out, the applicants had to have committed funds at the time of applications, and then they had 60 days to gather those up. So many of you in the room, banks and businesses, major employers, the organizations themselves, communities, provided that match and stepped up with those funds. Here's the list of the 14 organizations that were awarded, and some of those are local single communities, some of those are more regional, some of them are county. But we did put all of the money out, and they all started committing to projects very quickly. As I mentioned, we have an annual reporting requirement. And so for that first 6 months, as of December 31st of 2018, this is only the first 6 months of activity, we invested $7,009,000. Several of the applicants had raised more than the minimum one-to-one matching funds, and some of them were had applied for $1 million, and their funding level was reduced just so we could get out more funds geographically across the state. But we raised 10.1 in matching funds, and the total projects that were awarded or committed to by December 31st, so really in that first few months of operations, the total project costs were $71 million. So a 10-to-1 return on state investment in first round. Almost all of these funds are revolving funds. They will continue to loan out. A lot of them are doing 0% construction loans on multifamily projects, and once that is completed, they'll roll into the next one. We had 15 units of substantial rehabilitation, and the rest were all new housing units to the state in 12 communities, 577 total new units. Most of those are new construction. There are a few of those that are upper story units that didn't exist as housing units prior, but are doing upper story downtown units. 491 of those are rentals, which really demonstrates the need, or confirms the need that we talked about earlier for rental units in these communities, and 86 single-family homeowner units. There were 2 or 3 applicants that had not made any commitments prior to December 31st. Those were taking place in January and February, and we've had a lot of ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, but we're really seeing a lot of ribbon cuttings going on right now. This is a picture of a single-family for sale unit in Central City. McHarg Builders building this unit, as well as some additional units not using the workforce housing at a lower price point. This one was just below the $275, but they're building some others in the $180 range also for workers. A family, this was under contract the day that we cut the ribbon, and a family with, I believe, 4 or 5 children live in this house today. And this is a picture that was taken earlier this year. Mark mentioned Skylar. Skylar had done a good job with single family and duplex units, but was really in need of a multifamily unit. Sorry, it's blurry, and it does have siding on it now, and it is renting up, and we're going to cut the ribbon on that in a couple of weeks in Skylar. So I believe that's a 48-unit project. The other resources that I just wanted to mention at the local level is the LB 840, local option sales tax for economic development. Workforce housing is an eligible activity under that program. There are 79 communities across the state that have it. We're starting to see them invest in housing at the local level, and always want to look at the community and see if they have those. Also, program incomes from past grants. We have a lot of that money sitting out across the state. Some of it's rolling all the time and some of it isn't. The department has a priority now to get those funds either repurposed, brought back to the state, or invested in projects. So we're working with them. The Department of Economic Development has a fully staffed housing team now. It's been an interesting couple of years, but we are fully staffed, and that's the list. And I have some cards here. You can get a hold of us either through the website. Does anybody else have any other questions?